Let's talk about keeping dogs separated in an intra-household aggression case. I'm Gabrielle Johnson. I'm a certified dog behavior consultant with my bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology. I own Best Life Dog Services, and I specialize in intra-household aggression. Intra-household aggression is when we have pets within the same home displaying aggressive behavior toward one another. Often, by the time I see these cases, this involves actual fights, which may or may not include physical damage. But this also includes cases where we're seeing lower level aggressive behavior, such as growling, hard staring, freezing. And I bring that up because if we can intervene before we have actual fights, that's great. It's just not usually the case. The three most common catalysts for intra-household aggression are arousal, resources, and tight spaces. And while there are a lot of patterns to intra-household aggression that we see across cases or across many cases, each case is also very individual. There are about 16 variables that we consider in an intra-household case, and you can have any combination of those variables present. Some of those variables help us determine whether the dogs need to be separated initially, or perhaps in the long term. And separation can mean in certain instances, in specific contexts, or often it can mean having the dogs or the pets completely separated. And this is hard. The ability to put this type of management into place is one of the variables we consider in the prognosis of an intra-household aggression case because it can be so important to implement. And I'll talk about that more in a second. First, I want to say this is often one of the hardest pieces for folks in an intra-household case. And I should say that while I specialize in this professionally, I also have personal experience living with an intra-household case with a high risk, high level fights, and total separation between the dogs for 5 years. So I can truly empathize with how difficult this is. Intra-household aggression cases are, I think, one of the most emotionally complex and emotionally taxing types of behavior cases, up there with separation anxiety and family-directed aggression. And the reason is that in those types of cases, you don't get a break. It's happening 24/7. In cases of intra-household aggression where we have to have complete or incomplete separation, oftentimes we are doubling the amount of work that the pet parents have to do on a daily basis to meet needs, to provide enrichment. We're often changing the way that the house flows and is laid out, and so that impacts everything. And then there's this level of hypervigilance waiting for a management oops to happen and trying to prevent it from happening, that exists all the time, 24/7. So when do we need incomplete or complete separation? So we need to know what the variables are in the case that come into play in terms of instigating or being the catalyst for these fights. The three most common are arousing situations, tight spaces, and resources, but there can certainly be others. So one of the variables to consider is the variety of these variables. Is there one trigger? Are there multiple triggers? How many triggers? And then the next question is, how manageable are these triggers? Do we even know what all of the triggers are yet? Or do we have some tension, some fights where we're not sure what set it off, either because no one witnessed it or because the trigger is unclear? And then how manageable are these triggers? So for example, maybe I have a case where the dogs are showing tense body language or have even gotten into a fight during mealtime. And that's it. We look around and we see that in the rest of the time, the dogs are genuinely comfortable with one another. And this is something I like to double check because oftentimes as pet parents, we are unaware of some of the lower level tensions happening. And it's really vital that even if we're only having fights, say, at mealtime, it's vital that we notice other moments of tension and stress where a fight could break out in the future, or even if it doesn't, where the relationship is continuing to deteriorate and therefore harming our prognosis. But for the sake of this example, let's say that truly the dogs are very comfortable with one another except at mealtime, where they've had a fight. And maybe it was a low level fight, maybe it's only happened once. Those are other variables we want to consider, the frequency of the fight. The higher the frequency, the worse our prognosis gets. And we want to consider the level of fight. And the Kara-Shannon bite scale is the scale that we want to use for that. We can't use the Dunbar scale or the Sophia-Yin scale. Those are for human bites. So back to the example. It might be very easy to manage that situation. I just feed my dogs in separate rooms during mealtime. And honestly, that might then end up being my long-term plan, rather than try to go through behavior therapy and get my dogs comfortable eating food next to each other and constantly having that risk. I might just feed my dogs separately, and that's totally acceptable. In fact, that's what I'd advise in that specific type of case. Now, I will say often when I see tension or fights in one situation, there is often other tension that we're missing in other places. Not always, but I can't actually think of a case where that hasn't been true. But so in that case, the dogs might not need to be separated all the time, only at mealtime. Now, let's say we have a case where there is a variety of triggers, and maybe one of the triggers is high arousal, and one of the dogs in the case has an anxiety disorder, or maybe they don't, maybe they're just really vocal. But in any case, they are reacting to sights and sounds outside of the house, and that is a trigger that we cannot completely manage. Maybe we can partially manage it with some sound blockers, some visual blockers, but we can't completely manage it. And so this dog's vocalizations and reactions are not able to be 100% managed, and they are difficult to predict. And let's say that the second dog goes after the first dog every time this happens. That might be an example of a trigger that's much harder to manage. And maybe in this case, that's not the only trigger. Maybe they also struggle, when the people come home and right before mealtime, and when one of the other dogs grabs a toy. And maybe there are some moments where we're not sure what the trigger is. We just get these seemingly random moments of tension, and we haven't figured out what's causing that yet. In that case, I probably need total separation between the pets for now, because we haven't identified all the triggers, and the triggers we are aware of are not predictable or manageable. Meaning the fights and the tension between the dogs are not predictable or manageable. Which is not to say they don't have a cause, but it might mean that the trigger itself is unpredictable in its presence, like the noises outside, or it might mean that we just don't know what some of those triggers are yet, and we need to dig in deeper, and we don't want the relationship deteriorating, stress stacking, or anyone being physically harmed, humans or pets, in the meantime. And that's why that separation can be so vital, is because if we continue to have these moments of tension, if we continue to have these fights, the relationship will continue to deteriorate. Our prognosis gets worse. The chances that the level of fights are going to escalate and get more physically severe are good. So how do we keep the pets separated? Especially, as this commenter asked, when you're doing it alone. It's hard. It's necessary to protect everyone's physical, mental, and emotional well-being, but it is hard. And in protecting the dogs or the pets' mental and emotional well-being, it can be harmful to the humans, as can breaking up dog fights. So smaller spaces can be hard because of the lack of space. Larger spaces can be hard because it can be harder to put up barriers. Doing it alone, solo, can be hard because you don't have any help, but the more people you have in the house, the higher risk of a management failure. So there are pros and cons. Some of my go-to tools are baby gates, X-pens, crates. Baby gates come in a variety of heights. X-pens are nice because you can get a really long option. So like in an open concept, you can divide big thresholds. And we can use X-pens creatively to divide rooms so that potentially you can set up the animals so that they kind of feel like they're in the room with you both, even if they're separated. Now, I do tend to recommend at least 2 barriers, including a visual barrier, because the likelihood of one barrier failing is high. And when the risk of that management failure is a dog fight, we really, really don't want that to fail. So 2 barriers helps make that less likely. In situations where it's possible to get one of the dogs out of the house, boarding, daycare, dog walks, staying with friends and family for a few hours or a few weeks, that can be a game changer, physically and emotionally. I'm running out of time on this video, but let me know if you'd like to hear more and what your questions are.